Hey guys, Ryan Gill here with Hunt Primitive, and we are going to be making this deer hunting point right now on the Hunt Primitive YouTube channel. So follow along, and this is a continuation of the Flint Knapping for beginners. So if you're new to my channel, do please consider subscribing, and I'll drop a link to that other video down in the description. But let's make this point right now. Let's jump right on into that. So we're going to be working with a piece of black Georgetown called Georgetown Black, and it's a little bit harder than the blue variant, and I've got a bunch of this, at least right now, never know how long it will last, on my website huntprimitive.com. But it's heat treated, so it is pretty glassy and nice stuff, and gets good and sharp, flakes really well. One of my all-time favorites for making points. Now, a lot of you, if you watched the very first video on the Flint Knapping for beginners, the first one that I did, this is kind of a continuation of that video. We're going to walk through this process again, but if you remember watching that video, I drop tools all the time, so I did you all a favor, and even though I always have a little table set up over here, normally it's filled just full of flakes and who knows what all that I'm working on, but I cleared out a nice spot to set all my tools so we don't have to hear everybody saying you should get a little table to sit next to you. So I like to hold tools in my lap, and you'll see that, but I just thought that a funny point to mention. But anyway, what we are absolutely going to be working through besides this piece of rock is same tools we did last time. There are a couple differences and a couple additions, and that is like indirect percussion stick. I have started working towards using some oak, and then still reinforced with sinew, and they've proven to be very strong. Same with the pressure flakers, where before I was running sticks. Now I am switching over to some oak dowels, and the only reason that I'm doing that, they are plenty strong. I have yet to break one. They're perfectly fine with that. I was worried mostly if you use like your poplar type handles and stuff, which are fine for for boppers, but if you use a soft, some sort of dowel, you're going to split it when you're trying to pressure flake, so that's why we don't use those. But I've switched over to that because the demand for these kits has been so high. I simply can't keep up with cutting sticks and seasoning them, so we had to move into a little bit more generic supply, but they work great. I had no problem with them, been using them here for quite a while. So that all being said, what you're going to see, all the tools that we're using is pretty much going to be what's included in the mastery kit. So even though this is still Flint Knapping for beginners, let's basically call it Flint Knapping for intermediates at this point, because I will go through showing you platforms and why I'm hitting at places, but I'm not necessarily going to walk through and tell you the exact reason that I'm doing it, but I will point everything out. So that's why the very first video that I did, if you're watching this one and you didn't see Flint Knapping for beginners, go down to the description and watch that one realistically first, unless you do have a good grasp on Flint Knapping. So still Flint Knapping for beginners. I'm not going crazy on you, but it's going to be a little bit of a step up from the last video. And then of course we'll run through different problems, because it's a different piece of rock. We'll run through different problems and different techniques. Every time you watch something like this, you learn a little bit more that maybe wasn't covered in the other video. So now, go ahead and start bifacing this out a little bit. Now what you'll notice is, like the bopper that I'm using, this one's got a lot of wear on it, right? And you can see how it kind of comes to a cone. So I do very much like them when they're still relatively fresh. This one's a little more, see, it's a little bit more squared off still, because you can be very direct with those hits. But you'll also find that once you start putting a lot of use, and I mean a lot of use and a lot of wear, and they start to cone like this, you can hammer them back down, but you'll also come to find out that these little fine tips actually work really, really good, because it's got the extra weight, but you can direct that hit. So instead of still hitting it up here, which I'll still do, I'll hit on the side if I'm removing big flakes where I'm chopping, but whenever I'm ready to remove a good flake, you'll notice that I switch and I'll use the tip and I'll catch that, and that's going to actually run a little cleaner flake because it's more directed on the tip of this, so I can be a little bit more precise. See, I'm using the tip now as opposed to when I use the side, so just kind of keep an eye on that. And then as your tools evolve, you're going to have some of those options, but obviously when you get them, they're all going to be brand new, which isn't a bad thing either, but you're just going to have all the squared edges to work on, and that's not a problem either, as you know, as you saw in the first first version of the video. So again, bifacing out, basically what I'm doing is I'm working around the entire piece first, and I'm going to get rid of all the squared off edges and the cortex and anything like that. So like even these sharp little knife edges, we're not going to be able to nap those, so we're just going to go ahead and get rid of them and knock them off. Although a lot of people would think that that sounds counterintuitive, that you have a nice thin edge and you're just going to go ahead and blunt it all over, but you can't drive a big long flake on that really thin knife edge. So that's why you need to kind of get rid of some of that. And then you can start walking and zigzagging back and forth. I did show that before, and here's a good spot to show it. So here we go. You can see now we have a nice platform that we can work with. Specifically, let me get a pointer here for you. Specifically, this platform right here is actually really good, and I think we can drive a flake off this way. And when we drive that flake off, I'm going to try to come right back to this position, so you can see that we'll probably have a platform that we can drive one off of this side. So when you have like something like these flat or really steep edges, we zigzag all the way around until every time we remove a flake, it creates a new platform. So anyway, go ahead and kind of memory mark that one really quick. I'm going to take a hit off of that one and I'll show you. Okay, same exact spot right there. Okay, so you see what we did? We knocked this one off, so now it actually created a little bit more of a platform to go this way. It's kind of an even platform. We could go either way, but I think we'll stand a better chance at actually removing that one. Now this one's not going to be a big hit, probably going to be a couple little choppy ones, but it still is a little platform. And that's going to set up our platform now down here. So now I can remove another bigger flake over on this side. Should have abraded that a little bit better. There we go. So great flake removal there. Now see how we started all the way up here, but we've zigzagged it. So now what we're going to do, looks like I actually have another one. I can go ahead and pop that one off quick, which I did. And now we've got that platform, abrade that off, flip it over the other way. We can remove that flake, set that one up, flip it over because we made another platform, and we walk that one down. And then next thing you know, look how much of that squared edge down here that we've knocked off by that zigzag technique. And by zigzagging, then we also have new platforms. But we're not going to touch those ones yet, because if you remember what I talked about before on having a whole big stack of paper, if you want to remove stacks of paper that are further down, you have to remove ones that are off the top too. That analogy seemed to really help a lot of people out. So if we're going to look at this, say this platform right here is a great example. If I hold it this way, you should be able to see it. See, there's a slight dish in here. It's very slight. But if we're trying to remove a flake off this platform and driving it into here, it's going into a dish, and therefore it's going to terminate at some point and start creating a step fracture. But it also is going to disperse energy even more because it's kind of crowded by this higher section. So what we really need to do is work this higher section off before we ever hit this. So if we're not going to walk this all the way around, which normally I do, what I'm going to do is remove this. I'm going to build this platform right, where's my pointer at again, right here. I'm going to build this platform up. So I'm going to remove material from this side going down. I'm going to chip that to raise the platform, and we can remove this. So go ahead and try to memory mark this exact spot, and I'm going to lay it down this way, and I'm going to grind and chip a little off. Okay, so you can see I move the platform off to that one side. The more you move a platform off to one side, the better chance at running a longer flake. And there we have it. Nice flake ran right across that high spot. And we're going to do another one up here. It's essentially created the same thing. Very good. Okay, see what we did? So that was built up before, but now we started to remove a lot of this high spot. So now, oddly enough, when you look at it, we looked at it this way before, the high spot is starting to drop down to the same level, and you can almost see a slight hump here now. You see that slight hump? It's still humped up over here, but it's like it dishes a little bit. A very slight hump, and then it dishes again. That's when we're creating a new hump that we'll be able to drive a flake across here. But before we do that, we still want to go back and get rid of the rest of this, because realistically, the thinner you get it here in the middle at first, the tougher it's going to be to thin the edges without snapping it. So let's go ahead and zigzag around that edge. Little choppy flakes here and there. We'll walk this all the way around. Now, something else while I'm doing this I wanted to address, because I had several people comment on what's the point of making Stone Age tools if you're using metal or modern tools, or what's the point of making Stone Age projectiles if you're going to use modern tools. Now, if you've been following along with my work for 15 or more years, you know that I never even touched a copper tool until I was 10 years into working with antler tools. Not everybody has that amount of time that they can dedicate to it. Copper does two things. It makes the mechanics a little bit easier because it grabs the rock a little bit more. So that, well, I mean, the mechanics are the same, but it does make the experience a little bit easier. And so realistically, yes, I think knapping with antler is incredibly important, and that's where my heart really lies, but I'm faster with copper. So when we're talking about me doing this for a living, like right now as I'm talking to you, just this month alone I have an order for 46 arrowheads. That's a lot of knapping. So copper does allow me to go a little bit faster, so this way customers don't have to necessarily wait as long to get their points. But then also, it's much easier on my joints. So what I learned through knapping with antler is I can only knap a few points, and then after those points my joints are just destroyed. I suffered from tendonitis really bad, and I had to get to a point where I had to accept the fact that maybe I needed to start switching to copper. And that doesn't mean that I don't knap with antler anymore. It just means whenever I sit down and do a large number of points, especially for customers, I have to use copper. The time doesn't allow me, and my joints don't allow me to do it anymore. So that's something that you'll hear from guys that have been napping for a long time. They'll let you know your joints get beat up. So copper doesn't affect you nearly as bad when you're doing that. So that's a good reason. And then, like I said, almost everybody that gets started into this has an interest in it, but they want a little bit more of an easier road. I mean, that's a human way, isn't it? So whether I have an interest in antler or not, most people have an interest in copper because it's a little bit easier. And the tools are easily replaced, and it's very, very consistent compared to a lot of your antler tools. So I hope that kind of clarifies some of that. See, now I should have taken better care. I got a step fracture, but I'll walk you through what I'm doing. I'm just continuing to zigzag around, getting rid of all the cortexes and stuff, which I've pretty much already done. But anyway, hopefully that all makes sense to you about why we're using copper and why you should potentially consider using it if you want to. But if you want to use antler tools, absolutely. In fact, I have a video on knapping with antler as well, but I'm gonna inevitably do another video on it as well, essentially avo knapping for beginners, which I already kind of have, but the more information I put out to y'all, the better. So what we basically did is I didn't try to make a point or a base or whatever. I've just worked all the way around this piece, so we're looking essentially made just a big disc out of it. And now I've got options, so I can continue to try and thin it out. So we've got like this little turtleback section here. We need to work this off, and then this side's actually not bad. Remember, this is the side that we had that was starting to dish out. No, that's, I don't even, yeah, no, it was, but we were working this side here. So I got to be kind of careful of that dish and keep removing some of these higher spots first. So I need a little bit of knapping lubrication. Hold on. Alright, and so we're also at that point where I'm probably going to walk away from the bigger bopper, and I will probably raise a couple platforms here and there with a pressure flaker, not much, so like this one here. I want to show you this one. Move it around for hopefully so you can really see. We got a nice platform, but actually on the top of the platform it's really trashy. I don't know if you can really, I think you can see it there. It's not just like a clean platform. There's like a bunch of like little tiny step fractures. Well, when you get impatient and you just hit on top of this, you're not actually transferring the energy down into the flake as much as you want. Some of it's going to actually probably run down a ridge this way. It's just going to disperse the energy. So you're not even realistically going to be able to hit it exactly where you want because you're hitting on all the step fracture crap. So that's when you're going to go ahead and take your pressure flaker and pop that off. And that was it right there. So that's all I needed to raise that platform, but get rid of, see if I can get her back on here maybe so you can see, right there, just like that. So that was kind of trashy on top, so we took the trash off, and boom, now we have a clean platform. So now we can abrade that off. And that's where I like to use the little rascal. If you remember that from the first video. Hold that and just freehand pop that thing right off. Now we did run down into that valley a little bit like I kind of warned against, but I did it anyway because I wanted to show you that. I know I can go back and fix that, so I'm not that worried about it. But I wanted to show you removing that. See, that's how we'll go back in and start fixing that that step fracture. I just took half of it off right there. So I wanted to show you cleaning that platform and then removing the flake. So then I came in the next one, remove that really nice thin little flake across center, so we'll easily be able to come over on this side and clean that up. But we got a ton of width. Realistically, when we're all said and done, we're going to be down to a preform that's about this big, and then we'll notch that and it'll be ready to hunt. Notch it, sharpen it. So again, we'll kind of work around this point a little bit. That was a good one there. Just looking at these platforms and explaining this again because I know I need to cover this again because it's incredibly important, and that is draw a line down the center of this point. Not the ridge that you're looking at, but when you're talking about between my two fingers, okay, draw a complete straight line, and you can see it's not going to run this ridge, it's going to run just on this side of the ridge. So that's your center line, your true center line of the point. Well, when you want to drive a flake off, your platform, this is your platform, needs to be off to the side of the center line on the side that you want to drive the flake. It's incredibly important because if you're trying to remove a flake on this side and you're hitting on a platform here, you're going to remove a flake that goes about this far, and that's about it. But now if it's on this side, you can transfer that energy to take a big flake out. Now, one thing that I'm not going to do that, I'm going to have to show you setting it up, but that was a great ridge and platform to show you, is if you can look down this, and I'm hoping you can, this is the platform we were just talking about. There's a turtle back here that's probably obstructing some of your view, but there's actually a bit of a dish in here, just very slight, especially right here. I'm going to walk that around so you can see it. So you can see it right there. There's a slight dish. And if we hit that platform, it's going to run right to the edge of this turtleback, and it's going to hinge right here. I'm really tempted to do it because I want to show you that it does it, but then I got to go fix it. But I know it's like one of those, do I do this intentionally so you can see what I'm talking about, or are you going to take my word for it? But basically what it would do there would do the same thing that it did here when I wasn't paying attention and I was talking to you about why to use copper, and I was like, well, crap, I did that, now I got to fix it. So if I do it on both sides, I'm really kind of screwing myself. And then of course what will happen, I'll hit it and I'll drive a big beautiful flake and I'll be like, okay, don't listen to what I say at all. But realistically, okay, so we have a little bit of a dish here. We don't want to hit it. So what we're actually going to do is, even though we're taking the flake off that side and our platform is built, we actually have to take our platform away. So this is why you really need to study a piece of rock before you hit it, because if you hit it on that dish, it's not going to travel a flake. So now we pretty much eliminated, not completely eliminated the dish, but what happened is we switched our platform now from this side to this side. Now hang with me a second, because there's some strategy to this. Now this side's already a little bit flat, but we still need to remove some flakes. So let me grab another bopper, and we're going to remove, even though this, ideally this is really the big turtleback we were trying to get rid of, this side I still need to remove some material. So I decided to switch my platform and clean this side up first. And a lot of this is intuitive, like it's going to take some practice to just know when you should do that. But I'm cleaning this side up, and by doing that, I'm decreasing the width, because remember, every time we remove material here, even though it's coming off the bottom, we're still losing some off the side. So we're decreasing our width, and that valley, or that little low spot that I had right here, we remove material, but as we move the edge in, now we can actually drive a flake underneath that valley. And I'm hoping that that makes sense to you. So now that we did that, and this side, we can actually clean this up really well, and it looks good. Actually, we probably don't need to take very much off of here anymore in the future at all. But now I'm going to build that platform again. So because we want to take the flake off of this side now, or I'll flip it around so it's the same direction you wanted to look at it before, we need to build that platform back up, and our valley's up here. So if we just build a slight platform, I think we can actually drive underneath that valley and carry the flake out, as opposed to it stopping and terminating right here. So we're going to build a little platform. Just by little choppy flakes, almost grinding with the tip of our pressure flaker. And then we're going to abrade. I like to abrade away from the platform that I'm going to hit. I don't need to abrade like crazy, but some. And then hit that platform right there. Now that's a little indicator there that did a little bit of what I was telling you it might. It didn't do it bad, but you can see there's a tiny, I mean it's like a ripple of the, so that's the flake that it was on. It ran out, but it actually started to hinge ever so slightly there, but it's not a big deal because we got a lot of meat to meet it over from this side. So I'm going to go ahead and try to grind this off, and I'm going to try to take a good hit out of here, but there is a good chance that it's going to step fracture right here. But I'm willing to take that gamble simply because I know I can fix it. So what I'm going to do is raise this, because our dish now is gone, so I'm going to raise our platform here so I can hopefully knock this big goofy looking turtle back off the back. So go ahead, raise the platform. That should do it. And now, nope. There we got some of it, but not all of it. It's not too bad. Now what we can do is this. So here's our turtleback still, and we didn't get it all off. We ran some more in here, but I already know if I keep hitting here, it's gonna step fracture. So we actually have a step fracture here. Now's when my mind starts to tell me, look, we have a lot of width back here, and it's actually relatively flat. Still has some flakes that need removed, but we don't have any major problems. Now's when my mind starts moving towards, this is gonna be the base of my point, because I can preserve as much width as I want to. This needs more work. Well, the tip of it, because you're working it down to a finer tip, you've got a lot more meat to get rid of, so you have more opportunities to get rid of the trash, right? So now what we can do is come along. I want to take this off, so I'm going to raise a platform, but I'm going to chop like little choppy hits, kind of crushing it into the shape at this point. So I'm not worried about driving big long flakes. I am basically chopping this thing into the shape where that's going to start wanting to be the point of this arrowhead. And I'll do that side too. So we're just raising platforms as we go. And that, see that? Oh, that's our turtleback right there. We raised the platform by chopping down this way. So now all of this is really accessible to remove with that platform. So I'm going to grind that off. I'll grab Little Rascal again. And ready for it. There we go. Went all the way, pretty much all, we hit it here and went almost all the way across it. Did step fracture here, not a big deal at all because we have a good platform to remove that, plus we need to get more narrow here anyway. So that's perfect. Took a nice big hit out of that. So clean those edges up a little bit with the pressure flaker. Take some of the sharper edges off, that way we don't accidentally hit one and knock a flake where we don't want to. And then we'll go ahead and try to take another one right there. Okay, it doesn't want to go, so now we're not going to force it. Now, instead of continuing to push here, which I could just force this to go, but it didn't want to let go, so let's start being smart about it. I'm going to start from the tip and I'm going to come over, but I don't want to hit that, so let me put these tools up a second, and that's where we're going to switch to an indirect percussion stick. And I'm going to pinch that down good, and I'm still wanting to take off of the side that has this big turtle back, and I'm going to start right here. And I'm going to start driving some flakes this way to clean it up. And in fact, I'll probably roll around the front and abrade this, and I'll start coming in this way. But as I remove material, grab me a pointer again here, as I remove material off of this tip and running into here, it's probably going to start to step fracture here. Now that's on purpose. I kind of want it to step fracture here because that step fracture is going to run into this step fracture. Then when we come back to this side and clean this platform up a little bit, you're going to have a turtle back that's surrounded basically by a moat of step fracture, and so when we hit it, it's going to pop and probably remove that perfectly clean, and with any luck take the step fractures that we have completely away. So we're almost step fracturing intentionally, but if we do get lucky and it runs all the way through the other side, I'm not going to complain about that either. So set that right where we want to hit it. See, it did that exactly like I just said that it would, and I kind of wanted it to. It ran right in. So this was our initial step fracture, right? So I ran in and I made another one right there. Okay? So it's pretty rare that you want to make a step fracture, but I kind of do. Now this one I don't need to hit. I can just take a pressure flake out of there and it's going to do the same dang thing, and it's going to keep following that same step fracture all the way across. Now I'm actually going to back up. At this point I want to clean the back side of this. See how our platforms are really pushed over and there's a dish here to this step fracture? So I'm going to go ahead, just take the little bopper and just clean those up just a little bit before we start getting that tip too thin. And that's how easily we can remove the step fractures that were back here. Remember the step fracture we had there? Hopefully you did see that. If not, you can always rewind it, I suppose, and go back. There was a little bit of step fracture going on here, so we just took some flakes out and evened that over. So now we have a nice, pretty much a nice flat cross section with a little bit of work that we could do here, and then this side we still have. But overall, it's all nice. So we're getting down to where this is the only problem spot that's left. So let's go ahead and keep isolating that turtle back and then really setting up a platform so we can remove it. Perfect. Okay, so now we've really isolated that whole turtle back section. The step fractures here, it's step fractured here, right? So now when we come at it, we're going to come at it from here, and we're going to be trying to knock probably within 1 to 3 hits. We get lucky on 1, it'll do it. 2 or 3, it's going to have to remove all of this. Now we still have plenty of room. If we need to raise a platform, we can drive this way, but if we continue to drive this way now, we're just going to keep hitting the step fracture. So if we take some mass off here first, then we can always come back in from this side. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to try to take one off with indirect percussion first. That worked really well. So we lost a piece because it flew out, but I caught another one. That's our turtleback. Okay, I want you to really find this here. I want you to be able to see it. See what we did. So here's the flake that I hit on, the little platform, and it ran across here. That flake shot off, and then this one is the rest of the flake that was attached to it, and that overshot and took away the step fracture that was here. So now the idea is we're going to set up another platform, which is a little bit trashy, so I'll probably have to remove material all the way back in. So if I hit it here, maybe you can see there's a little bit of a fracture right there. Can you see that little fracture? If we hit it here with direct percussion or indirect, it's going to step fracture right here and just make a big mess of it anyway. So let's go ahead and take the big pressure flaker, and I'm going to chip this stuff down this direction to get rid of this little fracture and build a new platform so I can come up to here and drive that across to this step fracture. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Let's take a few here, break that little mess off. That should be perfect. I braid that off. Okay, see the platform we made? Now we're going to do the same exact thing we just did. Now one thing, beautiful, I lost the pieces, but it did, it ran right across like it was supposed to. There we go, here we go. That turtleback is gone. Okay, we have a little bit of cleanup we could possibly do, but that turtleback is now gone. Look how flat it is all the way across the point of that. Now one thing that anybody that's got their hands on one of these indirect percussion sticks, I was still pretty much learning through the last process that I was showing people, but I use it so much now, I'm very, very comfortable with it. Anybody that I know, I'm sure there's somebody that it hasn't done, they haven't really figured it out, but pretty much everybody that's got their hands on one, whether they make it or they buy it or whatever, is it levels them up a lot. Like you go from a mediocre napper to a really good napper by using an indirect percussion stick and really learning to use it, because it's very safe and you don't stand as near as much of a chance of breaking the point as you do with direct percussion, and you can be very focused on what platform, set it up, take your time, line up, and then you hit it, knock it off, and it can drive some serious flakes, and it takes the accuracy problem out of swinging by hand. So I utilize all of these tools in different areas of the point, and you'll see me swap back and forth. I don't care, like I've said many times before, I'm always wanting to teach people and hope that people become better nappers. So get a stick, get one from me or get one from someone else, I don't care. But then get in the comments and let me know, did you get one of these somewhere down the line? How has it upped your game? Because this is a huge game changer for, like I said, about anybody I know that's got a hold of one. It is working for them. So here's where we're at. I'm going to take another quick break, but we've kind of got our preformed out. Now at this point we're going to start grinding it down to where we just finished the point out. Alright, put some tools up, and we'll start kind of forcing this thing right down into the shape of the arrowhead that we want. So I'll grab probably this medium bopper. I've started to get some weird affinity with using it almost as an abrader because it's so rough. I've used it so much. I kind of use it as an abrader to crush, but I have more torque than just trying. I've seen people hold their abrader and they're able to actually crush like this, but to me it just shot stuff in my eye. I don't much care for that. So it actually works, but then it tears your abrader up, where this, it doesn't seem to bother me. But I kind of roll. It's like almost like a big pressure flaker and abrader all in one. So you see how that kind of works? So give that a try. It's it's not going to work on a new one. It's only going to work on one that's got a lot of wear on it, like this. But then I also have these like little ridges that start to build. You can see that, and it's kind of a good way to start knocking some of those weird curled over ridges off too. So just little nuances along the way that as your tools evolve, you start to use them in ways that you never once thought you could. So what we're doing is I'm basically, like I said, grinding and crushing this thing into the shape that I want. And by doing that, I'm raising all new platforms. So this is a very, very important tip that I can give you, and I hope that you can wrap your head around it, because it might be hard to explain. If you start getting a point that's wider and it's fairly thin through the cross section, and you are like, okay, well, I need to make it thinner, you know, so it penetrates better or whatever, and you just keep raising small platforms and running them in, eventually you get to a point where, yes, you have a very, very thin point, but then you get to a point where there's no convexity to it. It's very, you know, you lose everything that's lenticular that lets you run some longer flakes. And so then what happens is you start running in, and I've done this many times, and it's actually really apparent on the Noonan points that I'm specifically trying to keep wide and make thin, is you start to get almost a ridge down the center, but it's not a nice gentle ridge. It runs in and starts making a whole bunch of step fractures right in the middle, and then they're really, really hard to get out. So instead of just continuing to try to thin the piece while it's still wide, we took all the major pieces off, all the major turtlebacks, but now what we're doing is we're grinding it into shape, but by doing that, it raises all new platforms, like high platforms. So now we'll be able to run flakes across center again, as opposed to just taking a thin point and keep trying to chop it down, if that makes sense to you. By, you know, that's what we're doing. We take a thin point and chop it down to, now you got some new platforms and then you can thin it, as opposed to saying, okay, well, I'm going to keep trying to drive thinning flakes until I get this point thin, because as you get, or until I get it more narrow, because the better that you get, especially with the indirect percussion, you'll get to a point where the point is so thin that you're taking more material off the tops and the sides than you, or the faces, than you are the side. And so once you've got to that point, well, that's a good problem to have, because that means you can make very, very thin points. But the problem then too is you're driving them in here so far that now it's so thin and it's so wide that that's when you're going to start getting some of those terminated flakes right in the middle. And now you've got to go and crush the sides and try to build a platform anyway. And now your point's almost too thin, and now you can break. You'll know what I'm talking about when you get there. But as of right now, like I said, if you get it to where it's thin, before you try to make that thing beautiful and then knock it into size, grind it to the shape that you want. So I don't think any of that made any sense. But if you know what I'm talking about, then you know what I'm talking about. But most of you are still probably trying to figure out how to truly get a point thin. And the secret to that, of course, is raising platforms, which is what we're doing now, and either the freehand work or the indirect percussion. Those are my biggest tools for getting a point thin. So now what we did was, see, we knocked it more down into the shape that we want, but see how many platforms now we've raised, which actually made this thing kind of like a corkscrew, which is good. So we made a platform here, we can take some off, but all of this now, I can thin this, and it's easier to thin it now. So this is what I was trying to explain. It's easier to crush it, make another high platform, and remove it and get it thin now, as opposed to leaving it wider and trying to make a little platform and driving it, because then you're getting step fractures. So get your point closer to its finished shape and then try to thin it. So even if your point was already looking thin and you're like, well, if I want to make it thinner but it's still really wide, that's the point I'm trying to drive home here, is go ahead and start getting the point closer to the dimensions you're looking for, then try another round of thinning, because now I'm in a position where I can use the indirect percussion and just drive more flakes one after another right down the edge, which it's not actually working as well as I wanted it to. I got that platform really well ground. There we go. Got some there. That was a good one. So you can see how thin we're starting to get it here again, and then here's a little bit a spot that's still a little bit thicker. So you can see how much that indirect percussion can really remove material. And it's a little bit safer overall, like I said, than swinging a billet at it. So another good flake there. That one, we got that one to go. Look at there. Okay. All these little flakes. There we go. See how much of that we popped off the tip? Perfect. We actually overshot and took gouge out this side, but that's perfectly fine. You can see that divot. That's perfectly fine because I still wanted to narrow this anyway, so I'm not that worried about that. Maybe one more right there. Took that one off, and maybe one tiny one. The rest I can pressure flake. And now this side, we're looking at the same kind of big mess. See, so this side actually looks really, really good now. This side we've got this mound up here with this big platform, so we're going to go in and we're going to take them off this side too. But now you got to be a little bit careful. You're going to be very light touch on this because you could accidentally blow right across the other side because now it's getting thin. So I'll take it off a little bit as I go. There we go, it's a good one. And a big one right there to thin this out a little bit more. So our tip is actually now to a point, it's a little bit cattywampus yet, but our tip's down to a point where I don't want to use indirect percussion on this so much. Now I can pressure flake the tip. So now we're going to go ahead, this back section that I've alluded to earlier, this is the base of the point. So we got a bit of a mound here, I need to take that off. And I probably should have done it before I ran this thin flake right across the section because now I just made it a risky point, so I need to hope I don't break it like I did in the first one. But let's go ahead and just develop this back up a little bit, raise the platform, but do not run across that this spot's thin like this. Now you stand a really big chance of when you try to hit it that it's actually going to snap it in half right there. So that was not a big deal for me so much because I'm pretty confident, but that's, you probably should have worked on thinning that base out just a little bit. Now the tip's fine to thin out, but when I drove that really big one across the center, try to stay away from the center until your tip and your base is a little bit better taken care of. But this is another instance where the indirect percussion stick is going to save you, because before we were using this and we were just using direct percussion, then we were still at a much bigger chance of breaking this. But indirect percussion is going to probably keep us from snapping this in half. Alright, so now I've just got to make the decision. Am I going to remove from the back first or the sides first? And it doesn't really matter. Just going to find a platform that appeals to me. That one worked out really well. Let's see how that worked. Nice thin flakes, starting to take that hump out. And it's always a little bit safer to go from the side than straight up the back, but it is very doable, especially with indirect percussion, to come from the back. So, but the side's working out really well. So there's another hit right there. And there's the flake come off of it. So you can see I'm just working down that platform. So right now you can be really picky about where you want to put this too. Here we go. Another flake off it. Now we can switch to the back, and we don't have to drive our flakes nearly as long now. And I'm going to support it, especially on that thin spot. I'm going to kind of pinch right here. Now I'm not pinching super hard. I just got a little bit of pressure in there to take some of the shock out of it whenever I hit it. And then I can get rid of the flake with my pointer finger. There we go. Another flakes right there. Little. You can see how thin they are because they're coming off in tiny little sheets. You can see that nice big platform. You see that? So that's what I'm working on. And see how I hold it and I twist my wrist to be in front of it, as opposed, sometimes you will see me do it from this side, and that's not a bad game. But at this point I'm using my finger as that support in that kind of that dish in the middle. So by holding it like this, I can flip it. So sometimes the way you hold your hand actually does make a difference. There we go. Oh, I lost that one in my hand before I could show it to you, but that was our big platform that was mounting up, see? So now we're getting the base thinned out. I'm going to go back and keep going across it, but now I am switching the way that I'm holding my hand this way, because I got the big piece off. Now I don't have as much of a dish anymore. Now it's just kind of a flat rock, so I don't need to support that spot as much as I did before. But again, a lot of that's going to be intuitive. You're going to have to do a lot of it and then trust your instincts. And sometimes you make the wrong instincts, but if you ever go to take a hit on a piece of rock, I don't care if it's pressure, flake, indirect, or direct percussion, if you go to take a hit and in your mind it says that doesn't feel right, then do not take the hit, because your mind's trying to teach you something. And if you let your body force through it, that's when you're going to be like, well, it broke. I knew I shouldn't have hit it. How many times have you ever heard a Flint Knapper say, I knew it. I knew I shouldn't have hit that right there. It's like, well, you know it, then don't do it. You have to trust your intuition at some point. Well, I thought I had a good one there to show you, but I didn't. They keep blowing off so fast, I can't catch them to show them to you. But we're really thinning her out now. Really getting there. I think we've kind of really walked that down into the size and shape we're looking for. Now we can do more work again with the pressure flaker. But you can see how thin we've really got that. So overall pretty good. We don't have any major concerns on the back. I mean, some teeny tiny little fingernail, I mean, like not even a fingernail thickness of step fractures, and that's super normal. We got a tiny bit of a high spot here and maybe here, but we're going to get rid of a lot of that again instead of trying to get it now, because we still need to get this closer to our shape. We're going to go ahead and grind this side down to raise the platform, so any of these little tiny things we want to get out, we can get out much easier. Try to get them out now, and you're going to start creating more step fractures because you're trying to drive a flake into spots that are already flat. So go ahead and crush this thing right into the shape so you can see. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this. People ask me, how do you replicate the size of your points all the time? Well, you can still see it. This one's smaller than this one. By the time it's all said and done, we should be very, very similar size to this. And that comes from practice in knowing when to crush and when to remove flakes. So I can pretty much reproduce the same size over and over and over. A lot of times I don't even have to hold them up and compare them. I just do enough of them, I know what that looks like. So now, start at the tip, and I'm removing flakes. I'm not just crushing, but I'm not trying to remove big long flakes either, but I'm not just grinding either, if that makes sense. So small flakes, like 1/8 to 1/4 inch long. A lot of them aren't even necessarily on platforms, because again, I'm not trying to drive a long flake. I'm just taking these little guys off right here, and that's actually going to clean up and straighten my edge on one side, and then I'll be able to come down and say, okay, well, if I follow this down, you can see I got like one little spot here, and I've got a little spot here, so that exposes it. And even though the platform's on the other side, because I'm only taking like 1/4 inch flake, I don't have to switch the platform over. Now I can rock that flake right off and get rid of it. The platform really only matters when you're talking about trying to reach into center. And by doing this, you can see I'm raising the platform again, because this is that little high spot on this side of the tip that I was telling you I wanted to get rid of. So we've essentially crushed it into shape, so now I can flip it over, and now's when I'm actually going to take the pressure flaker, and I'm going to try to push and get in there, 3/8 of an inch to 1/2 of an inch. And I could use some indirect on this, but pressure is even safer yet. So if I can get it with pressure flaking, I'm going to. If I can't get it with pressure flaking, then I'll switch back to indirect. Very nice. So I'm getting some good flakes, and we've just about, I'll show that to you again. See, this was our platform edge, and I've got like one more flake here and then a couple here, but not only have we thinned that out, but we've gotten rid of that high spot. And then of course there's this little high spot here that kind of makes the point curl a little bit. So as we build this up, we're going to knock that thinner, then the curl will be out of the point as well. Good one. Good one. Another good one. Beautiful. I'm just going to keep working right down the point as long as they want to come off good. One right there. Right there. Very good. That side's really nice, really clean. See that? Really getting somewhere on this one. So now, look on this side. See, the lighting's just not so good for y'all, is it? I'm sorry. That's what I get for using a black rock, huh? So the platform really favors this side, but this side is already really flat and really clean. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to remove, we're going to grind down and raise the platform to go on this side, but that's also going to give us a chance to narrow the point up a little bit because it's still a little bit wider than I really want it. So I know a lot of people, when you're getting into knapping, and they say, well, I want to make the biggest point that the piece of rock will allow. And that's perfectly fine if you're putting them in a display case, or if you're making a knife or something like that, or you're just not good at making the big points. But when you get to a point where you're specifically making arrowheads to put on arrows to hunt with, you don't want big points. You want small ones because they penetrate better. And if you don't really understand anything on that, I have a ton of information as to why you want to shoot small stone points, and I have that information on my website at huntprimitive.com, and you can find that under like the information section, and I've got some articles that I've written on it. And actually we have a whole big project coming out on small points, probably fall or winter. I'm shoving it back a little bit here in 2020, maybe even around the new year. It's kind of hard to say when these things come out. But I raised that platform to the other side, so now I'm gonna flip it over and start driving some of the flakes off like we did the other side. But so what happens is not only do you want, so here's another, this is another preform I did yesterday. So you can see we're already smaller, but it's very considerably sized. Well, this isn't ready to turn, it is ready to turn into an arrowhead. It's like asking for directions and saying you can't get there from here. So this is just further away. So you see how this has some slight rounded edges to it? We want to get rid of all of that because that slows down penetration, believe it or not, and we want it to be very sleek and straight on the one we're working on. Now, I'm going to grab you an example. I want to show you something that's really, really important. Hang with me for 1 second. I put this point together really fast and intentionally did not finish it. And I want to show it to you here in 1 second. Because this is what a lot of your beginners' points are going to look like. And you get very excited because you got something that looks like an arrowhead, right? And you should be proud of this, especially for some of your first attempts. You know, you're going to have some high spots. But remember, perfection takes a lot of time, and you may even get some sharp edges and say, yeah, that'll do, that'll kill. But the problem is, I want you to wrap your head around the idea that you see how the blade is a lot more rounded. Now, when you're talking about real artifacts that you find, like you find something like this in the woods or in a field, and you think, okay, well, this is an arrowhead. Realistically, it's not. This is an atlatl point. And so you can actually get away with a point being more robust and more rounded because the atlatl's got more weight. And if you have a very thin little fragile point on the end of an atlatl, it breaks really easily. Where an arrow point is going to be quite the opposite. You need it to be very sleek and thin and almost delicate. So if you shoot a deer with one like this, you may kill it, you may get it. I know people that have done it. I have also seen points just like this bounce off of deer because they start to round, and as some of these edges, and it's a little bit thick in here, and some of these edges aren't as refined, as you go in, remember, body's got, it's kind of like a, almost like shooting a trampoline, you know, in a way. It's going to have some push back, and then there's going to be some heavy resistance till it pops through. So what happens if you get to a point where the nose of your point is too rounded or too blunt, so like even if it was more blunt than this, it's not going to want to penetrate, and it's going to absorb all the energy of that arrow, and it's either going to stop penetration. I've even had them completely bounce. I've shot a deer one time with a point that wasn't too far off this. I hit it and it bounced off and the arrow came back to me. It's real true story stuff. So yes, be proud of yourself for making something like this. But if you want real information on what kills deer, it's going to be something that's shaped more like this. This has a lot, this is going to like, it's like popping a balloon. If you could run at a balloon with a blunt or a rounded object, you have to push really hard till it goes pop. But you can walk right up with the teeny tip of this and touch it and it'll pop. So what you're doing, as soon as you perforate that skin and that rib cage that starts to bend, or it starts to kind of buckle, it wants to push back, as soon as you perforate it, now all of a sudden the tip's through, the rest of it will pop through and tear much easier, just like it would on a balloon, than it will when you have a thicker one. So I want you to keep that in mind. Now the reason I went through and I said all of that is because I want to explain why I'm not just stopping here on the one that we're working on and then saying, well, this is good enough, and why do you continue to thin it and make the points smaller and smaller and smaller? Because I know that there's a specific size and a specific shape that does really well, and you need to use that to your advantage. And what I mean by using that to your advantage is when you have issues like little curls in it or little high spots, you can look at it and say, okay, well, it's still kind of rounded, and this is okay, this would work, but we can make it better, and we always want to make it better if we can. So I have a little bit of a high spot, even though it's small, I have a little more width here than I want, so let's just go ahead and raise the platform, and then eventually you get down to the perfect size, and it's very, very thin because you were meticulous in your build. So once you get something that looks like an arrowhead, I know that as a beginner, even an intermediate, you want to say, okay, it's done. You want to notch it and say, good, this is my hunting point, but don't quit on it yet. That is essentially the sign of a beginner. Now somebody that turns into a good, hunting point napper is going to start having the confidence, I'm not going to break it. Because I think that's what you get down to, right? Is you make something like this and you're like, okay, I finally got one that didn't break, so I'm going to hurry up and finish it so it can be done, and now I can put it in the win column. I made one. But once you get to the point that you're confident you're not going to break it, and if you do break it, it's not a big deal, you're just going to make another one, that's when you're going to say, okay, I'm going to continue working this and I'm going to make it the best that it can possibly be. And that's how you start making the best stone points, is by being very, very picky. Now see what I ended up doing there? You can see how it rose. I took more off this side so I could establish this platform right here. And now I've got another nice platform that I can start running flakes in thinning and making this whole point not only thinner but also more narrow, but I'm also making the tip geometry better so it wants to penetrate an animal better. I'm taking any of the roundness out of the blade, making it very streamlined. And then that's at that point too where when you get down to the end product and you want to serrate it, you can say, well, serrations slow the point down. Well, serrations are really important for causing a lot of hemorrhage. So serrations really don't slow a point down if A, they're very, very sharp, and then B, it's on a point that's very well made with steep tip geometry. It's when people take a point like this and then they serrate it and then it bounces off, they blame the serrations. It's not the serrations, it's the big rounded nose in the front and the fact that it's actually really thick and there's a lot of surface area in here, and then you serrate it, and then if your serrations are either big or not sharp, that's compounding the problem. So the problem isn't serrations, it's the design of the build. But we've taken some really heavily serrated points and chunked them through deer, as long as the point is very thin and it's very streamlined outside of the serrations. But the serrations, of course, have to be sharp as well. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So right now, I'm just kind of finishing this tip up where I want it. And it's looking very, very good. And so even though it's actually okay, it's still not as thin on the back as I want. It's a very wide point. So what I'm continuing to do, even though this is actually, it's well napped on either side, and by the eye, when you look at it, I say, okay, well, I don't need to thin it because it's already good. It's wider than I want. I want about 7/8 wide on this because that's what's legal for deer hunting. So I'm going to continue to work this down, but instead of just crushing it down completely, I'm removing little flakes. Sometimes I do just crush it down, depends how thin it is. I'm removing flakes to raise platforms, because if I'm going to make it more narrow, well shoot, I got a little tiny piece here, I could make the point better. So shoot, raise the platform, and once your platform is raised, now you're just on the micro level of driving longer flakes across to get those turtlebacks, even albeit small turtlebacks, but you're making the point better as you make it thinner. And so this also is where having an eye for symmetry really helps as well, because a symmetrical point does have less drag and less dispersion, is that right? Dispersion, sounds good, of energy when it hits, because if it's got a rounded one side, this side now has more drag and could actually make the point start to spin as it hits the animal, and that's going to take energy out of your animal, or out of your arrow. So that stuff is very, very important, believe that or not. So you can say, well, the point doesn't have to be symmetrical to kill, but keep in mind a lot of your artifacts, these bigger artifacts that are asymmetrical, they're knife blades, they're not projectiles. Most of your best projectiles are going to be fairly symmetrical. So there we are. So we're raising a platform again, because it's still not to the size that I want it. I have a very specific size in mind that I know works, and that's why I tell people too, if you end up getting hunting points from me, you know that I'm extremely meticulous, and I am not going to send you a point that I don't think is going to penetrate a deer. Like, I just won't do it. That's why I don't make great big points for people that say I want a 300 grain point, because it's out of the context of primitive hunting anyway, as far as stone projectiles for shot off arrows, but they're simply too big, because stone is less dense than steel. So you're talking about a 300 grain metal point that's very slick and sleek the whole way through, may be great for penetration, but you're talking about 150 grain stone point is very big and now has a lot more surface area, is not good for penetration. So that's why I'm very particular, because I want to make sure that people get stone points that they are going to be successful with. The last thing I want to do is sell you something just because you want it. Then you get to a point where, hey, this didn't work, and then I say, oh yeah, by the way, I probably wouldn't have done that. That's how you get a bad reputation. I'd rather somebody just say, well, if you're not going to make me my 150 grain point, then I'm just going to go buy it from somebody else. And I say, good, go buy it from somebody else. And that way when it fails, if it fails, it may kill them, may not. I'm not saying you can't do it, but on a consistent basis, I've killed enough animals that I kind of know what works good and what doesn't. But if you fail, like I've seen many, many, many people do, I don't want you to be telling everybody that my points didn't penetrate. You're not going to have that problem with points from Hunt Primitive, because I'm going to make sure that you got a point. Now, if it doesn't penetrate, it's not the point. I can promise you that. It's either shot placement, your arrow, or your bow. So, and I can't control all of your variables, but I can definitely make a point as best as it can be. Now, of course, if I make your bow and arrow set too, then not to toot my own horn, but again, I know what I'm doing with it. You're going to get a set you can kill some animals with, for sure. But that comes with experience in all of this. When you buy stuff that's not wrapped in plastic and not guaranteed to work to an industry standard, you start getting into this primitive stuff. That's starts to be a little bit more difficult to be efficient, if you follow my drift on that. So anyway, see, now I've worked her down more and more and more and more and more. Now look at that shape that we're getting. Now tell me that that's not going to penetrate a heck of a lot better than this preform I was working on yesterday. Absolutely it would. If you can't recognize that this one is going to penetrate much better than this one, then honestly I don't even know what to tell you. Shoot whatever you want to shoot. So get to a point where I'm going to clean the back up a little bit. So aside from the napping lesson, I hope that you take away the importance of continuing to work the point down to a very functional arrowhead. Not just one that looks like an arrowhead or looks like something that you found in a cornfield, but something that is very efficient. And think back to some of the best arrowhead producers in history, which would be the Cahokia people, or the the Cahokia mounds. You're talking about very, very well made points for the most part. And when you find stuff in cornfields, remember a lot of that stuff is garbage that people have. They've exhausted it. They're exhausted knife blades. They're atlatl points that are broken. A lot of them aren't even true arrowheads. Most of your true arrowheads are going to be very, very small, like this. The ones we're making today are this big because we kind of have the ability in some of our modern builds to use this, but also the law dictates it must be 7/8 of an inch. If you've been following along with a lot of the stuff that I've been doing recently, I'm shooting hogs because that's legal and collecting data on points that are about this big, and they are dropping within sight because they penetrate so well and they cut so well. So again, those big clunky points you see, they weren't ever used on an arrow anyway. So keep that in mind. Now, working through this, realistically it's done. What I'm doing now is I'm being a perfectionist, and then I'm also knocking down any other little high spots that I know I can get rid of. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those, clean my symmetry up, and I'm going to probably thin the back ever so slightly because I'm assuming that this one's a little bit longer than this one. I'm going to hold it up and we're going to see. That's absolutely correct. I could just judge that by looking at it. Obviously it's sitting there, but I knew before even comparing it that I had a little bit more length, and that's not a bad thing. But if I'm going to make a little bit more of a match set, again, the longer your point is, the more surface area it's on the cutting blade. It may look good, and people are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he's taking that long blade and he's making it shorter. Remember, this is purpose built for hunting. So I don't want a tremendous amount of surface area. I want this point to get in, do its job, mess up a whole bunch of things, and the best way to do that is to make it smaller and more streamlined, but still be of the legal width so it fits in with our modern game laws that have no clue about anything that has to do with stone projectiles. So we're kind of, but we'll still be able to penetrate just fine with these. Take a 50-pound bow, or a bow that shoots, a bow that shoots at least 150 feet per second with a 500 grain arrow, and you will have no problem. You put this on the rib cage of a deer, you'll come out both sides every single time. Very confident in that. Okay, now we're where we want to be. It might be a teeny tiny bit longer, but it's actually a little bit more narrow. It's perfect. See, it's a tiny bit longer. Now we're in where we want to be. So there is our little arrowhead preform, and it's very thin, and it's ready to notch and sharpen. Very, very nice little point. Alright, let's finish this thing out. Switch the battery in the camera. I'll switch over to one of my little micro flakers. Okay? Because once you get to a point when you can create points that are this thin, then you can actually skip the flat handled. Now, when your points are still thicker and you haven't learned how to get them really, really thin, you're probably going to work into one of the flat bladed pressure flakers like this that I hammer flat. And I may have to use one, but I'm probably going to be okay with this. Now, if your points are thick, you're never going to be able to get in here with the micro flaker. So that's why I include in the kits the flat, larger pressure flaker that you can get some bigger bites out of, because if your points are thicker, you're never going to be able to remove them with this. So this is kind of the more advanced of the notching compared to the other one that we've shown before. So this is going to be a side notch point. Now what I'm doing is when I come in and I do I think I showed this to you before, but I'm going to get this one started. I do a little bit that way. I do some this way, and I'm over exaggerating this a little because I want to show you how I do it. The notch on this one's going to be a little bit bigger, but I'm okay with that because I want to teach you about it. So you can see what I did in here was I removed flakes over here. And I'm looking, I can't even see it myself. Got flakes here, and it's left like a little nipple in the middle. It's very, very slight. It's better if I just get out of the way so you can see. I'll use that as a, there you go. See that's how it made an E? And there's a little piece in the middle. Now that piece is a little bit of a fail-safe when you first get started. If you lose your platform, you can grab that ear and knock it off and you'll get an extra little platform. So try to leave that E in there as much as you can. And it's also in transitional or early archaic times, let's say like that, you have something called a bowl and E notch, and the reason is they were using a piece of antler and they were doing the same technique because they could get the notch in further, and then a lot of times they just simply left that little tab on there and never knocked it off, and so that turned into what they called an E notch. And so that's what I'm doing here, is I'll remove one off each side, or maybe one or two little ones, and then I'll flip it over. And once you get in here to a certain distance, I'm fixing to show it to you again before I knock it off. Let's use that again to focus in on it. Maybe. Trying to find her for you. Hold on. There, you can kind of see it there. Okay, so you still see that little nipple that's in the middle of it sticking out? So now we're in there deep. Now instead of terminating that out, now what we do is I'm going to grab right a hold of that, and I'm going to pop that off, and that's going to give me a new platform. So there, I just completely nipped it off and it's completely gone. Right there. Now I've got a new platform, and I'm actually going to start the E all over again. So if you start stalling your notches, that little E notch is going to be a beautiful little trick to help you get your notches deeper. Okay? So what I did was, now I just created a new E. Okay? And I just basically bottomed that out. So now I'm going to grab that platform and I pop that off again. So now the E is gone, but now I have a nice new fresh surface. So I'm going to start making a new E. And I'm going to walk that in all the way in until either it completely terminates in the thicker cross section of the point, or my notch is deep enough and I don't want to go any further. And now you can do that with antler or copper as well, but like I said, once you get down to where you're on a thin point, the little microflaker is going to work out really well for you in that instance. So finish this out, then I'll show you that notch. Like I said, I'm not necessarily going for the most beautiful notch because I was trying to make that E big enough that you could see what I was talking about. But I think we're done now on that one. So there you go. That's the first. Geez, that worked out good last time, didn't it? Now you can see that notch, how we've gotten that in there pretty deep. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing on the other side. It's just the same process. So instead of showing it to you, again, if you need to see it, just rewind it. But I'm just going to go ahead and pop that one out the same way, but I'll do it a little bit faster and just get it done. And then we can hurry up and we can sharpen this point, and then you guys will be free to go because class will be dismissed, and hopefully you will be able to make better points. But don't leave yet because we're not haven't sharpened it yet. You can always learn something new about sharpening. We're going to use the microflaker again for that, because when you get your points thin, you can get nicer little serrations with those as well. So there we go. This one's almost done. accidentally leaned. You got to be a little bit careful too hard you lean. I leaned on it and actually popped this upper corner off right here, so that's a little straighter. It's not a big deal. I mean, it's really nothing at all. I'll fix that, but I just wanted to point out, you'll notice stuff like that happens and it's kind of annoying. So don't push super. If you have to force it in, you're going to end up snapping that point in half. It's going to be worse than breaking the back of the ear off. You're just going to break the point. So you need to keep walking around until you find the platforms to remove. Notching does take some practice, I'm not going to lie. It kind of made it probably look easy for you. But it does take a little bit of practice. Alright, that's good. It's not quite as deep as the other one. Let's see if I've got another one. Because my E kind of terminated a little bit. There we go. Okay, never mind, I'm back on it. Just had to look a little closer for one little tiny platform I could get a hold of. All it takes is one good platform. You can get a whole new series of flakes going. So when you terminate a notch, it's because you basically ground all your platforms instead of flaking them. So there we go. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and get my pressure flaker again. Remember how the point was a little bit longer anyway than the other one that I wanted? Not a big deal. I'll just take a little bit off the back until I can square that edge up again. And you didn't have to, you know, but it makes it look a little bit nicer. Clean that. Drive some new flakes. And just be careful along the edges. You'll just go ahead and nip those right off if you're not careful. Let me check for some symmetry here. I like symmetrical points. Very much so. So there we're really getting into it now. And I'll do a very light braid just to knock anything super loose. Now we're going to use that little micro flaker again. I'm going to start from the back. And I'm just going to start one side. I'm not going to zigzag. I'm not going to flip it over. I'm going to go from one side, removing one flake. Remember, if you watch the other video, we talked about it. It's one click, as much as you can. If it's going, you're grinding it. You don't want to grind. You want one click. And the distance between my flakes is about the width of my flaker. So of course if you have a smaller flaker, you're going to get smaller serrations, but they can still be just as sharp. They may not be quite as violent, but now when you're talking about using antler and getting those really thin ones, I can serrate this whole thing, and I notched with it too, and I don't have to sharpen it. Now when you talk about using antler, how do you get the very small serrations when you use antler? Is you essentially do a couple serrations and then you sharpen it. You do a couple serrations and you sharpen it. And then, well, you might get one side, but then you better sharpen it and then before you do the other, because you'll notice that, especially on some of my earlier points in history. If you look back in any of videos I've done before, a lot of times you'll see I have thin serrations on one side, and on the other side they start to get bigger, and that's because my flaker gets bigger because it's getting more blunted. So that's kind of the little secret to that is, yes, if you want little tiny serrations like this, or like you see on the Cahokia points, like the real artifacts, then you need to use a piece of antler, or a piece of bone is great too, and you're going to do about that many, and you need to sharpen a new little point on it. But I'll go ahead and finish this out. So notice I did the one side, I flipped it over and did the other, so it's quite sharp right now. Let's see, let's use this again. That worked good, didn't it? See? It's very sharp, and if I rub it on the back here, it catches my skin and it wants to rip it. That's a good sign. I could do a little bit more work right there, so I'm going to, if I can make it sharper, I'm going to make it sharper. I don't mind taking the extra time to make the sharpest point I possibly can, because I want to bring the animal down as fast as I can. And the more little sharp serrations you have on this, the more hemorrhage, the more blood loss, the more lungs fill with blood, the faster it dies. That's the basics of that. So now I'm going to go ahead and sharpen the other side. and then we're going to talk about refining the tip one more time, and then we will be done. So hang tight with me one more second till I finish it, and then we'll be done. And we'll have an absolutely perfect little hunting point. Be careful along that tip. You want to snap that tip off. So even remember when I go back and do the other side, I didn't make that clear in this video. Whenever I flipped it over, so I did this side first, and then I flip it over, I'm not going on the tip, the little platform, I'm actually going on the inside of the serration. So if you're thinking about this being a serration, and then this being like a big giant pressure flaker that comes in and removes it. So this is serration, this serration. When you flip it over, I'm going on the inside and I'm removing another click that way. So this way I'm leaving those tips, but I can go back, and sometimes I'll use to just kind of true that tip up a little bit, and I don't want to grind it, but I do want to click it, because that's what's going to make it sharp. If you grind the serration, now you have a dull serration. So you don't want that. You always want to just remove a clean flake, because the clean flake is what makes a piece of rock sharp. It's not the shape of a piece of rock that makes it sharp or being ground into shape, it's the fresh broken edge is what makes it sharp. So if you have one that you need to go back and clean up, it needs to be tiny clicks. Like right now I'm just going to clean, you can't see it, but I'm cleaning up the edge of a couple of these serrations, and I'm still taking little click flakes out. You do not want to grind at all. If you're grinding it into, trying to grind a serration into being sharp, it's not going to be sharp. So okay, that's done. Now let's do the tip real quick. The tip on this one's really good. It doesn't need much work, but very, very important. You could, a lot of people would, again, stop here on their tip, and the tip's not bad, but it's not really that sharp. You can see it's kind of squared off and blunted, and you know what, it may be fine. Now I've seen people that have their tips almost completely broke off, and they're like, nah, that's fine, that'll penetrate. Man, don't go into the woods trying to do that kind of stuff, because you're gonna have a bad experience. Take 2 minutes and refine that tip, and get that tip as absolutely sharp as you can make it, because you get one chance to penetrate that animal. You get one chance. I go in, I want these things like the tip of a pin, the tip of a sewing needle, sharp, because I want them to penetrate the second that it hits. Now that tip may break off, but that tip's job is to break that balloon. You know what I mean? We're going up and we're popping it. That's what we're trying to do, is start it. Just start that penetration, and then the rest of the point will follow. See how much sharper that actually is? It doesn't actually look that sharp on the camera, which drives me nuts, but it's really sharp. It doesn't look that sharp, at least to me when I'm looking in the camera back at myself. But that is very, very sharp compared to, again, let's grab that preform where you see a lot of people stop, right? So look at your differences in these tips. The camera focus on that a minute. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. There we go. Now you can tell there's a huge difference in penetrative quality between the left and the right. Absolutely can. So that's what you're looking for. And now we are completely done and made a really nice black Georgetown. It actually looks like dacite because it's so black, doesn't it? But it's flint or chert. Really, really nice point. We're ready to hunt, and I would say this one's actually a little bit bigger on the size than I still typically like to make, but a lot of my customers use ones this size, and they still do work very, very well. But this is right around probably the 80 grain range is what this is at. So when you think about it, it's only about as wide as my finger. A little bit wider. It's probably 7/8, almost maybe an inch wide. So pretty good overall. Hey, thanks for following along. And if you're looking for any of this stuff, Again, you can find it at huntprimitive.com. So if you're looking for finished arrowheads, if you're looking for tools, if you're looking like for this rock, all that stuff, huntprimitive.com. Thanks for following along. We'll catch you on the next adventure.